Hey everybody, you got a short week this week with the holiday. So you don't have an assignment to worry about. There's no writing assignment, no quiz, no discussion board. Um, However, really important information when you consider the overall idea, the concept of the course. Um, in this short week, make sure you get your papers done, turn them in early if you can. It helps. It helps me, and then it'll also get that off your plate, and you won't need to be worrying about it as you close in on finals week. Um, let's talk about sentencing. Sentencing, always extremely um, controversial, tons of issues with it. A lot of work by my colleagues in the academic world, and in trying uh, to change it, alter it, and we'll talk about a couple of areas. You're going to have 7 learning points this week. The first is understanding the philosophies, the different philosophies, the ancient idea of retribution, and the fact that even though it is extremely old, it's still prominent in the sentencing world or in the legal world. Deterrence. If there's enough of a penalty, the thought is that you will be able to deter people, both individually and also generally. So I saw this in the 80s when, because of the big uptick in crime in the late 80s, and California enacted a statute which made residential burglary a flat, period, full stop felony. So if a person was arrested for burglary, they were sentenced to state prison. I should say they were found guilty. They were sentenced to state prison. Now, interesting thing is that we would run, I mean, when you went out in the field during the week, weekdays, and on swing shift, go 10-8 at 3 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, you knew that you were going to take 2 or 3 burglary reports that night, every night. It was really, really something. Once the higher penalties come in, there becomes a general deterrence, and we saw less and less residential burglary, probably in a pretty quick fashion, which my sense is means that not a lot of people were doing residential burglaries, but they were doing a lot of them because they were making a lot of money off of it. Rehabilitative philosophy, and that's the idea of taking someone who has criminal background and providing them with programs and schooling and such to help them once they come out and become much less concerned with the with crime and doing more things to for themselves to be productive. Great idea. The one thing that everybody has to keep in mind is the high level of recidivism, meaning people that go out, get arrested, get convicted, get sentenced, and then come back and commit more crime once they've served a sentence or been released on parole, probation, whatever the circumstance is. And those are, that's the real problem with the rehabilitative approach is, do you achieve, who are you getting to? Are you getting to the first-time offenders? Because first-time offenders classically reoffend less than a second or third or fourth or fifth level offender. Next is incapacitation. And that's what we see now. You have a high level of people in prison, high numbers of people in prison, and you have a low crime rate. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that people that are going to reoffend can't because they're in prison. They're incapacitated. Keep that in mind. Now, here's the one you really should focus on and look at, especially if you're going corrections route, or at least when you have corrections courses, because this is the new buzzword in the past 10 years, I guess, of criminal justice, and that's restorative justice. Understanding that not only has a victim been hurt, the community's been hurt, and then also the offender has suffered an injury by this. And the idea of restorative justice is to make those whole. That's learning point one. Second learning point, it's something we don't really think about a lot, but sentencing is an executive function. It is done by judges, but it's overseen by people of the executive branch. So you have the judiciary who does and that has been in the past a point of controversy in the courts. Is that constitutional? Does that affect the balance of the branches of government? So, third point, legislative function. And legislative function has come up with things such as determinate and indeterminate sentencing. Make sure you understand both of those. And then look at the idea of the federal guidelines, also very important. Fourth point, and that's going to be the courtroom work group and how that work group functions under the sentencing schemes. Probation is kind of it's a big player in the adult court, huge player in the juvenile court, but a big player in the adult court. And they provide what's known as the PSIR, the Pre-Sentence Investigation Report. Dr. Fradella has an example in the text, excuse me. So you might want to take a look at that and just to see what you think of it, and so that you know the components of a PSIR. And then judges, the other predominant member of the courtroom work group in sentencing. Judges will look at trying to obtain a consensus within the courtroom work group, but they still are fairly autonomous as to what they decide and how they decide it. Let's talk about the next point. Number 5, trends. You see trends towards lower sentences, changing or decriminalizing activities such as shoplifting. Shoplifting was could be a potential felony. So let's say a person decides they're going to go into Bass Pro Shops. I have no idea why I selected that BPS, but they're going to go into Bass Pro Shops and they're going to steal a fairly expensive fishing pole. And they do that. They walk out with a $500 fly rod. Well, if they entered with the intent to steal, that satisfies burglary and could be charged as burglary. So especially if you had somebody who was prior convictions, maybe prior petty thefts, maybe a long history of shoplifting, you might see them charged as a felony. More often than not, if it was a $400, we'll say, fishing rod, then it would be a misdemeanor. Now, what we've done is we've moved the bar on grand theft from $400 to $950, and shoplifting is released on a citation only if the amount is less than $950, regardless of what the intent was of the person when they entered the store. So under Prop 47, many things are now stealing a handgun worth less than $950 is a misdemeanor. So that's one of the ways the legislature has become involved in reducing prison population. fairly strong opposition from organized law enforcement, PORAC, peace officers, um, research, and be interesting to see, because of the unintended consequence is going to be a rise in crime. Do we see that? 2018, for violent crime in California, we saw it come down after ticking up for about the three prior years. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with the with crime with these things. The next one is intermediate sanctions. There's also other sentences that judges can use. Community service, intensive supervision, probation, home detention, GPS monitoring. I had the case, and it got past me. It comes out of Anaheim, where the two guys are on house detention, GPS monitoring, and they go out and they commit a whole series of a matter of crimes that are serial killings, and they weren't monitored effectively, and there was nothing that would tie them back into the homicides. So that's one of the big issues that you have, and there's always going to be a measure of error. The question is how much of that error is society willing to take and accept, and that's going to be the big question. Spend some time with the death penalty information. Always a hot topic. California has a different way of approaching it. There was a referendum on the ballot where a majority of Californians supported the death penalty. The governor, in his attempt to get reelected, or to get elected, not reelected, but elected, said, we want to abide by what the citizens say. Well, the citizens say what he doesn't like, so then he goes and gets into office and overrules the citizens. That really smacks of elitism, and that he knows better than people, and he should be allowed to do what he wants. Really interesting point when you look at the political makeup. Normal penalties. The next point. Understand what normal penalties are. I mean, I'm almost positive you will see something on normal penalties in the final. And then the last thing is spend some time in the area of disparity in sentencing, whether it has to do with race, age, gender, all areas where you see something different than the normal 20 or 15 to 26-year-old offender. All things to think about. So that's this week. Good luck with it. You really only have to spend the time on the reading, the slides, and of course this marvelous presentation. Hopefully you'll have a good Thanksgiving and have a chance to spend it with your families. And if you don't, if you have to work, completely understand. Did it myself for 30 years, and I totally get that. But that being said, we will see you guys in class.